Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Our top story this morning is that levels of home ownership have fallen to their lowest levels since the 1980s. That's according to new analysis. The think tank, the Resolution Foundation, says the housing crisis in London has now spread, with regions in the north and the Midlands becoming increasingly unaffordable. The biggest fall in home ownership has been in Manchester. Our business correspondent, Victoria Fritz, is there. Tell us more about what's going on, Victoria. Hi there.
Hi, good morning, Joanna. Yes, as you see, the steepest fall has been in Greater Manchester. We've seen about a 14% fall in home ownership over the last 13 years to just over half of all property is owned by people living in their own homes. The rest, of course, is rented. This is a pretty typical property. This has been on the market about 6 weeks. It's on for £149,000, which is about the average price for the area. And what's really interesting is the man who's selling it, he's looking to sell this to be able to buy other homes that he can then rent out to other people, because the rental yield is increasing here and it's a real issue. We're seeing rising rents, rising prices, people talking about affordability as one of the key drivers for the reasons why we're seeing a fall in home ownership. But there are plenty of other reasons as well. Take a listen to this.
After booming in the 1980s, home ownership has largely been in decline. But now, new analysis shows home ownership in England is at its lowest level in 30 years. The Resolution Foundation says the number of people who own their home has dropped to 64%, down 7% from a peak 13 years ago. The biggest falls have been in Greater Manchester and Outer London, although the West Midlands and West Yorkshire have also experienced falls of 10% or more. Northern Ireland has seen the most dramatic switch from owning to renting. The think tank, which carried out this analysis, argues that the housing crisis is no longer confined to London. They also warn it's threatening to reduce living standards and future wealth. In response, the government says policies like Right to Buy and starter homes mean that more than a decade-long decline in home ownership has been halted. The Prime Minister Theresa May has acknowledged there is more to do, although some experts argue that the move towards renting could also be due to changing lifestyles and improved rental stock.
Now, that's certainly what the agents of the houses that are being sold on this street are saying. They're saying that the rental stock is improving, that landlords are putting more into their properties, and because they're simply more on the market, they have to up their game. Now, we're talking to lots of experts throughout the day, and they've been saying that actually what's going on is we're seeing about 30% of the entire rental market is actually professionals who are sitting on a fair amount of money, and they are choosing not to buy because they're choosing to hold on to their money. Perhaps they're working across the country, maybe some days in London, maybe some days up in the north. So we're seeing a real change in the makeup of the people who are renting for lots of different reasons, not just affordability and bank lending, but also things around job security, for example, and the fact that people are living in perhaps slightly better housing than was available 20 years ago. Keep, of course, your comments coming in. I know you're going to be tweeting throughout the rest of the programme, so keep them coming in to Victoria Derbyshire programme.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Exactly as Victoria says, do let us know your thoughts and experiences of buying a property or not. Now, if you live in the UK, you're less likely to own your own home than at any time since the 1980s. That's according to a new report. The social policy think tank, the Resolution Foundation, says the housing crisis in the London area has spread, with regions in the Midlands and the North becoming increasingly unaffordable. Greater Manchester has seen the biggest drop in home ownership in recent years. It peaked at 72% in 2003, but is now 58%. Well, joining us from our studio in Edinburgh is Andrew Steele. He's a father of three from Livingston, struggling to buy his own home. And with me here in the studio, Connor Darcy, policy analyst at the Resolution Foundation, which has put that report together. Thank you both very much for joining us. Talk us through the figures, first of all, Connor. What have you found?
As you said, we've seen this really big drop. We're back to the levels of home ownership that we originally saw in the 80s. And it has been, the kind of story around the housing crisis is generally that London has been really badly affected, and it's, really difficult to get get on the housing ladder here. And that obviously is borne out by the findings. But what we've seen and what's kind of less in the public consciousness is that this is spread across the country, particularly in the north. You mentioned Manchester, where we've seen this really sharp drop, but it's also in cities like Leeds, like Sheffield, where we've also seen a really steep fall off.
And why do you think that is?
There's a range of factors. One is just the fact that incomes haven't been able to keep up with house prices. You know, house prices have risen and risen and risen, and the amount of money that you need to save to get a deposit for a house has obviously gone up as well. But what we've seen since the crisis, but even before then, is that the incomes of typical families haven't been keeping pace with those rises. So trying to get that money together to afford that home is really difficult.
Andrew, you're in Edinburgh. Tell us, you're from Livingston, but joining us from Edinburgh. Tell us what your experience is.
Well, my experience is that my partner and I, we both work. We have full-time employment, but just as your contributor was saying there, we are unable to save, to put something aside to pay for a deposit, and we are seen as a risk if we do apply for a mortgage. We both work full-time. The unfortunate thing is that we are having to look further afield for work. I work in the public sector. My wages haven't kept up with what it would take to pay for that mortgage, and unfortunately we've had to move in with our mother-in-law to support our children.
Can you see the situation changing? I mean, if you said about looking further afield, are there possibilities elsewhere?
The job that I have is 125 miles from my home address, and I have to travel there. It was the job that I wanted. It is the only job that would have me at the moment. Trying to get onto that property ladder and saving and commuting and paying for the things that you have to pay for, it just is not enough. We're not paid enough. You can't put things aside. All the savings that we have, they go to paying for family holidays, because I'm not prepared to say to my children, sorry, we can't go on a family holiday because your mum and dad don't earn enough.
Does home ownership matter to you?
Yes, it does. It would give us a place that we could call our own. It's unfortunate that we're stuck in a position where we're living with a family member, and the only chance of us getting on the property ladder is for that family member to pass on and leave the house to us. I don't want to be in that position. I know my partner doesn't want to be in that position. I would like my own home. I would like that when my children grow up, they can afford their own home as well.
Connor, is that a pretty typical example of the sort of things that you're hearing about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that intergenerational point is really key, I think, because obviously it's difficult now, as Andrew said, in the moment, trying to get by, having to make difficult decisions around whether to go on holiday or other things to do. But it's this longer term issue of what, you know, when he's older, when he's retired, and, you know, if you're still renting, having extra costs going out, and, you know, renting is more expensive than home ownership, you're not building those assets that people really do rely on in the future and obviously want to pass down to their kids. So I think there's a real kind of long-term problem as well as the short-term issues.
I mean, obviously, if people are unable to afford to buy, you'd think market forces would mean house prices would drop. Looking back to what's happened in the past and what the trends are now, is it likely that the balance is likely to be restruck in order to make there less of a gap between incomes and house prices?
I think at the moment it looks unlikely, but I think what the focus really needs to be from Theresa May's new government is to put the emphasis on building more houses, increasing that supply, especially in places where there is a real high demand, places like Edinburgh, places like Manchester, where more and more families are looking to get on the housing ladder. And I think that the other side of it is that, you know, we talked about the private rented sector, and that can be a really good solution, especially for younger people. But it's about improving the security of those tenancies, about improving the quality and the overcrowding, I think. So there's a kind of a two-handed strategy to this.
Victoria on Facebook, my husband and I are on good salaries, £38,000 and £48,000. It's depressing that we can't afford to pay for our own home because we're paying £850 in London for rent before bills. After 3 years of marriage, we've only managed to save £7,000. I'm 43, my husband's 42. Unfortunately, we are generation rent. Matt on Facebook, something has to give in the housing market. But as it is so heavily linked to our economy, I doubt the government will do anything to tackle the problem. Email from Chris, the buy-to-let market has driven house prices up. This is due to interest rates being so low. People with money to invest have bought houses to rent out. Private landlords should have to abide by exactly the same rules as social landlords. I wonder if they were forced to sell to their tenants, would they find it as desirable then? Andy has tweeted, sad state of affairs when property now, quotes, earns more than highly paid professionals. No wonder everyone wants to be a landlord. The government says that a continuing decline in home ownership has been halted because of Right to Buy and other initiatives to help people get on the property ladder. What difference have initiatives like that made?
I think they've definitely helped, but I think the kind of the target group for those and the people who've most benefited were people who are trying to get on the housing ladder. So that example of the two earners on 30, 40,000, where they're better off than probably most people in the country. It's these kind of policies are likely to help you get on the ladder that bit faster. But for people lower down the income ladder, it is much more difficult to really build up that deposit in the first place, even with the help of these policies.
Andrew, could those policies help you at all?
If those policies could help us, it would be helpful for the government, both the UK government and the devolved governments, to show us how to access these schemes, give us better advice and better support on how we can access these schemes and how we can get on that property ladder, and I just don't see that.
What will you do?
I think I'm just going to have to carry on trying to save, trying to get on that property ladder, and hopefully at some point the housing prices in my area can come down, and maybe at some point my partner and I can move out and have a place of our own and have that security which we really want.
I mean, as you save, are you seeing prices going up, which is obviously always soul destroying when you feel like you're sort of constantly trying to catch up with something?
Yes, we're trying to put aside, we're trying to get ourselves up to that level so that we can afford, and unfortunately that's just not happening because the housing prices are going up faster than our wages are.
Grant has emailed, what has not been mentioned, the buy-to-let trend may have a consequence on the amount of properties available to buy. Some landlords have more than 300 houses on their books, which diminishes the housing stock available to buy. These are usually affordable first-time buyer type houses. Email from Jane. One contributing factor that is never mentioned is the impact of university debt. Few graduates, young professionals can afford to buy their own homes in their 20s because they are saddled with debt. And Stuart has tweeted, my granny saved for years to get a mortgage, then spent 25 years paying the £800 back. Times change, the struggle doesn't. Thank you both very much for joining us, and thank you for your comments.